Sharon, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, and thank you, Elle, for such a gracious introduction.
Of course. Okay, so let's get our listeners grounded. Most people know Zoom for its video meetings, but what does Zoom offer today?
Zoom's come a long way. It's not just meetings anymore. It's a full platform. You have Zoom Phone, Contact Center, Team Chat, and over 2,000 apps in the Zoom app marketplace. So I actually led the go-to-market strategy for the Zoom app marketplace. So that means building programs that actually help customers, but doing more inside Zoom, whether it's a small business or an enterprise. One of the programs I'll share today used an account-based approach to remove blockers for high-intent customers. And, it pushed me to partner with Field in unexpected ways.
Got it. This is a perfect example of when a company transitions beyond its inception in that growth stage. It sounds like Zoom grew a lot. 2,000 apps is a lot. I know there's companies out there with even more, I'm sure, but for a video conferencing platform, it feels like a lot. So that is the kind of evolution I think that creates a lot of new challenges and opportunities for product marketers, especially when it comes to working with the field. So let's get into that. For the first segment of our show, let's dive into a case study about influencing the sales team. So now, Sharon, take us back to when you realized you needed to engage with the field in a whole new way. What was going on with Zoom at that time?
Well, Zoom was expanding quickly beyond just meetings, and oftentimes the native functionality just didn't keep pace with what the customers needed. So, like as an example, Zoom Phone. Zoom Phone was growing, but key functionality like fax support was missing.
Okay, so that makes me feel or think of industries like healthcare. What do you think?
That's right. And I actually have an interesting example in terms of healthcare that'll kind of bring it home to the listeners. Literally last week, I was seeing a new doctor. I had my records that I think consisted of like 100 pages or something, ready to email them. However, the office manager couldn't accept it unless it was faxed.
Wow.
Yeah, fax is still a thing. And it is actually really important in highly regulated industries because it's just one of the most secure and compliant ways to transmit sensitive documents. So for many organizations, switching to Zoom Phone just wasn't a compelling option. And I think what's interesting in all this is that it wasn't for the business a demand gen issue. It was actually a blocker to conversion for high intent pipeline. And the opportunity existed in multiple use cases, which is why partnerships are so important.
Got it. Okay. So the real issue was that Zoom had outgrown its initial inception and these new challenges arose in the market. And when you realized that it wasn't a complete solution and that you had these focus segments like healthcare that needed more. So what did you do? What was the task at hand?
I could see this wasn't just a missing feature, so I developed a scalable go-to-market strategy. Starts with making sure I had the right partner that meets customer needs, and then ultimately supporting the field and sales to close the deals. What was interesting, though, at this time at the company, it was all about AI. So I had to be thoughtful, like, how am I going to get some of that mind share from the sales team? So with that said, I had already had a large stakeholder team that I was leading, and I had to think differently. So there's a plot twist coming. I stepped outside the product marketing swim lane.
Okay, wait, before you tell us about the plot twist, let me catch up for a minute. So Zoom was quickly expanding beyond meetings. You found these critical gaps like fax were missing and blocking these big deals in key industries. So your task at hand was unblocking that revenue without waiting on the roadmap. That sounds like working with a sales team. So tell us more about the plot twist now and how you stepped outside the PMM swim lane.
Definitely. So I needed attention from the field. So I ended up introducing a sales incentive program, something not typically led by product marketing. But it just made sense because of what the business needed. Funded it from the marketing budget based on conversations I had with the sales team. Quite simply, reps were asking for company swag. And I built a program around that, but it had to have clear intent that this was about making sure I engaged the sales team, but also move deals forward for both Zoom Phone and the ISV partner.
Okay, so great. I need to click deeper on something that you said. I think your actual words were in conversations with sales. So that's so important for product marketers. Tell us more about those conversations and why they were important.
I mean, sales is on the front lines with customers. So if you are going to reach your customer, a relationship with sales is a no-brainer. In this case, I tapped a few colleagues for some quick feedback. And those, informal, honest conversations are what sparked the idea. They weren't asking for more marketing decks. They were asking for something simple that made them feel connected to the brand and gave them a reason to re-engage accounts. Now, once that was set from a strategic perspective, it was really about rolling out the program. So I had to shift to execution mode. I joined sales calls, whether it was North America, Europe, or Asia. And it wasn't about kind of making more work. It was just making sure I was plugged in to the existing go-to-market motions to support the team. I also set up a Zoom team chat channel with the partner. So if sales had questions, they had direct access to the subject matter expert to help close those deals.
Yes. Okay. So the tips that you shared just now are so helpful. You joined sales calls and you talked to sales leaders and you created the chat with sales. I think all of that is really helpful for a product marketer who's trying to get closer to sales. You basically embedded yourself into the sales team. And then you took the incentive that you built and added it as part of your entire go-to-market strategy. I feel like most PMMs would have stopped at the enablement materials, but you created this comprehensive approach. So I'm eager to hear about the results. Tell us more.
Absolutely. We ended up seeing over 60% sales participation in just one quarter. And after I started getting some messages from sales about how excited they were about their Zoom swag, I basically said, hey, would you mind promoting it, to your colleagues, get them engaged, be a part of the incentive program, start to close those deals. And the cool thing about that is it builds mind share, not from a marketer, it's from a peer.
Yep, someone that they trust. So you basically use this organic feedback as social proof to get the other salespeople interested in the incentive itself. Very smart.
And ultimately, the overall go-to-market program ended up driving millions in net new customer account value. And at the end of the day, it accelerated stalled deals and allows the customer to say yes. So I think, the one takeaway I would love the teams in product marketing to have, they're listening today, is just it's okay to step outside your swim lane, especially when it's going to impact the customer and the business supports it.
Yep, I could not agree more. Okay, so at the end of the day, how does a PMM know if we need to put together a sales incentive program or not?
Fair question. I would say that that's probably more of a tactic than it is a solution. So it's not really the starting point.
Ah, okay, good point. All right, so let me back up and summarize then so we can get to the starting point. So Zoom expanded beyond meetings and you had to unblock that revenue. Then you basically did that by stepping outside your role as a PMM and truly influenced sales by embedding yourself with the team, joining calls worldwide, creating the chat channel and everything, ultimately driving millions for the business. Love it. So I have so many questions about this, but let's start with putting together a guide for PMMs. If I were trying to influence the sales team in my org today, what are the steps that I would need to take? What is step one?
Step one is honestly to listen to your customers and your internal teams. Think about, what are those gaps or opportunities that may not be fully reflected in the current priorities.
Got it. Okay, so you said listen to your customers and teams. What does that look like? And then I guess looking at that in comparison with maybe what the current priorities are for the company, tell us more about what it looks like to identify that disconnect and what metrics I should be looking at.
Good questions. It starts with listening, both what are the customers saying? What does the data show? So on the qualitative side, it might be sales calls, support feedback, or reoccurring themes in customer interviews. And then I'd say on the data side, it's taking a look at those win-loss reports, asking questions like, hey, are high intent deals stalling because it's something we're not offering? And I think that if demand is there, but conversion is not happening, there's probably something to look a bit further into.
Oh, got it. Okay, those are really helpful examples to look for. So once I identify that gap, what are the ways to influence a sales team? Or I guess what I'm asking is, how did you determine how to influence the team? I'm guessing that it had something to do with learning their needs and, when you embedded yourself in that team.
There's a lot of ways to influence sales. I mean, it could be messaging, it could be a customer state case study. But I think ultimately you just have to have a real conversation with your sales team, your internal customers.
Yep. Now that I think about it, I've had actually a very similar experience to yours, where when I built a sales program in the past, actually at Twilio, I interviewed salespeople to understand where their pains were and what kind of training and assets that they needed. And that hugely contributed to a sales program that I created. So it sounds like at Zoom, you obviously had a number of stakeholders. You mentioned you had this big stakeholder management for the entire go-to-market strategy, but I guess more for the incentive program in relation to sales specifically, who were the stakeholders that you connected with as you built the program?
First, I love the example that you shared. The stakeholders that I connected with are customer success managers, account executives, to ultimately share my idea and discuss what you're solving for. I mean, it's ultimately about having the real conversations, what could work, but also what's reasonable.
Got it. Okay. So to recap, the steps a PMM would need to take to influence sales, or specifically the sales team, would be one, to identify if there is a disconnect between priorities and customer needs. And then two, talk to your sales team, understand what their needs are to unblock their success. And then what is step three? Would it be to build a program or a strategy itself, I guess?
You're onto it. It's ultimately to build that, but build it together with the sales team. So it's not about building it in a vacuum. Take what you heard from sales, layer in those customer insights, design something that fits into their workflow. Doesn't have to be complicated. Quite frankly, the simpler, the better.
Good point. Okay, so once you've identified that gap, you're working with sales. How do you build a program that sticks? And how do you know that, or how do you know if an incentive, like giving away swag, is the right lever to pull?
I think a program that sticks, honestly, is not guaranteed. You have to keep listening, understanding if it impacted your metrics that you were solving for. And for us, the incentive part of the go to market effort was a test for the quarter. So, with that said, swag for us was also the right lever because it was based off a customer insight that was real and powerful from the sales team. They're connecting with customers virtually or in person. They need to be energized and feel supported.
Yes, how brilliant. So you use the feedback that you got from sales, and then also, it sounds really obvious, but most people probably don't really think about it. But to your point, salespeople are out with customers and they're on the front lines and managing those engagements and really bringing the spirit of the brand to those customer engagements. So giving them the swag to kind of just add that extra oomph, I guess you could say, sounds like it was really valuable. So yeah, it's not just the incentive itself. And what else I know about getting an incentive program funded, especially out of a marketing budget, is that it is no small feat. It takes alignment with leadership and usually have to tie it to pipeline. In fact, I've only ever received approval on something like this was when I worked closely with a sales leader and we used funding through like a SPIF program. It wasn't marketing. So help us understand, what are your tips and ideas on how do you get buy-in for something like this?
Totally fair. It was a revenue blocker, and this was a clear way to actually be able to help sales close deals. So, with that said, it is still part of changing sales behavior. So, first up is okay, there's funds in the marketing budget. And then it's, connecting with marketing to make sure you have leadership approval on that. Then connecting with sales leadership to make sure that they agree and they ultimately approve it.
Got it. Okay. And I personally love that you used swag. Again, it just brings the spirit of the brand and Maybe it's just because I'm such a natural cheerleader, so I like branded stuff. But what was your rationale for using swag versus something like gift cards or something like that?
Super insightful. Gift cards can be tricky, and the reason is because there's sometimes tax implications with sales, and that makes it harder to manage. Using swag honestly was simpler. The budget was already approved. We had access to the company store. So, in a way, it was a sunk cost. It felt easy, scalable, and it reinforced the brand, as you mentioned, while still giving reps something fun and meaningful to share.
Yes, it like ticks every box. Love that. And true to your point, you said earlier in our conversation, you said the simpler the better. And even like the incentive itself, like just the logistics of it, it sounds like was simple. So that's a really helpful way to think about structuring incentive programs that might use swag. Okay, so last question for you on this topic, Sharon. What advice do you have for a product marketer who is looking to influence the sales team for their product?
It's simple. Treat them as an internal customer.
Yes. Okay. You know what's really funny is I ask that question at the end of every case study for this segment of all of my episodes. And almost all of my guests say something to the effect of talk to customers or listen to your customers, which is true. We should absolutely do that. But it's so easy to forget that our sales team are our internal customers. And I really appreciate you bringing that perspective and reminding us of that. So, Sharon, thank you so much for sharing this playbook with us. I know a lot of PMMs are going to walk away with some great practical insights and ideas that they can actually try. All right, so now it's time for our next segment, the messaging critique. This is where we, as product marketing experts, get to analyze real world messaging. But the fun part is that you, Sharon, my guest, get to pick the company that we look at. So before we get started, let me tell you the ground rules. So first, you're going to tell me the company or product that you want to look at the messaging. You're going to tell me something that you're loving about the messaging. Then you're going to tell me something that you wish the PMM would have done differently. And then lastly, you're going to tell us where you think the messaging could go next or how the PMM could iterate on it and take it further. Maybe it's a creative content idea or campaign or something of that matter. Again, this is all about learning, refining our craft, no negativity, just a thoughtful, constructive critique. So let's get into it. Tell me what product or company has caught your attention, good, bad, or somewhere in between.
Have you heard of Time Left?
I haven't. Tell me more. What do they do?
So, Time Left is a really interesting B2C app that brings strangers together for real world connection. So, first, you take a short personality quiz. It's not like Myers Briggs. You basically are rating your interest on things like family, nature, or politics. Then the app matches you with 5 or 6 people for a midweek dinner. You pay for your reservation for the dinner and then ultimately the meal that you have. And after the dinner, there's an optional bar to meet at. And the neat thing is, like, anyone participating in dinners that night in the city could go. So you can meet more people. It's super cool.
That is so fascinating and so cool. And as someone who has moved to a new place in my adulthood and not having very many familiar friends nearby, I could totally appreciate something like this. Okay, so who do you think their target customer is?
It's not about really demographics. It's really more about the mindset. You know, the people drawn to Time Left are curious and open, the kind who think, I'd love to meet someone new and see if there's a connection, but I just haven't found the right way to do it. Kind of like what you were saying, moving to a new area and looking for some new folks to get in touch with.
I feel like it's really hard for adults to make new friends.
It can be a challenge. So, with that, it does attract a mix. There are newcomers coming to the city, parents looking for more adult conversation, tourists, locals, and they all have that real desire for connection. And sometimes in big cities, even though there's tons of people, there can be a little bit of loneliness, and so there can be a bit of a disconnect, and that's what they're solving for.
I love that drive to solve for loneliness. It's such a feel-good product. So tell me, what are you loving about the messaging for their product?
I think Time Left's core message, which is meet strangers for dinner every Wednesday, book your seat, meet five strangers, all matched by a personality algorithm. It's simple, consistent, and inviting. It has a clear call to action to lead to in real life connection. What's interesting is though it doesn't like say it outright, it's clearly positioning itself against doom scrolling and endless swiping you oftentimes see whether it's social media or dating apps. And, if you think about when you have the real conversations, it is usually over dinner. It could be at the kitchen or at the dinner table, or in this case, a restaurant with some strangers.
Yes, the dinner table or the kitchen brings people together. I love that. Okay, so real quick for our listeners, if you want to check them out, it's timeleft.com. And when I pull up their website, as you said, it's very clean screen and it's just very pretty font actually that reads every Wednesday, strangers meet for dinner with a CTA of book your seat. So I love personally that they didn't overcomplicate it with more information that's totally unnecessary. Like I feel like B2B would have had like 10 unnecessary buzzwords in there. So what's something that you wish the PMM would have considered?
I really appreciate the app bridges the online and real life experience. They do rematching features as well as post dinner surveys. That said, I do find after the dinner, many connections moved to WhatsApp threads and then quickly went away. No one really followed up. So you can honestly, through the app, reconnect with folks that you met if everyone opts in for the next dinner. But there's still an opportunity to play a stronger role in just helping those new relationships grow.
Yeah, I think that's such a great idea. They should totally pilot something like that and see how it sticks. So, great plug for their PMMs to do some more customer research around how to make that experience even better. Okay, so then lastly, how would you take this to the next level?
Building on what you just mentioned in terms of, look into customer research, improve the experience, it honestly would just be to focus on what's happening after the dinner. So it already is an app that converts from online to, again, in real world connection, which is super rare. But for some users, if, they're attending multiple dinners, maybe they'll have that connection. But others might just attend once or twice and still walk away seeking that deeper connection. So there's definitely an opportunity, like where in the journey does that connection start to fade and why? So while I focused on the post dinner experience as an area to improve, it may actually begin earlier. It's right at the start when someone takes that personality quiz or books a reservation or get max with the group. So, it's about looking holistically at the full customer journey to see like where are those experiences that could just be more cohesive and lasting. And if it is a pattern, dig into it, like partner with the product team, run some user research, from a UX and go to market lens. And with that said, this is obviously an outside in perspective. I would never assume to know all of the work that is already happening behind the scenes. And also, I'm a huge advocate. So, as a customer and advocate, as we talk about it, I'm going to keep watching and see what's next.
Of course. Yes, I could totally see the need for more like frequent face-to-face interactions, by the way, just to make connections truly stick. But in any case, I totally respect their mission and the clean, simplistic approach to their messaging. So, first of all, shout out to any time left PMMs who may be out there listening. And second, maybe they should reach out to Sharon to see if they can get some guidance or coaching. You've got some really strong ideas here, at least to drill down and see what else could be there. So great job with your messaging, time left PMMs. We're very intrigued and we love the product. Okay, so Sharon, one thing I try to make space for in this show is a moment of gratitude because in product marketing, none of us get here alone. We learn so much from each other and we build on each other's work and we're all better for it. So before we wrap up, I want to have a genuine thank you to you for taking so much of your time to coming on here and sharing your insights, basically giving me a free coaching session. So thank you. And then I'd love to turn it around to you. who are one or two PMMs who've really made an impact on your career? It's a perfect moment to give them a little shout out.
First of all, I love this. We need to celebrate people more. And the fact that you're making a point to include this on your show says volumes about you. So, with that said, I would say a cheers to a former manager, Andrea. And, what I loved about her is that it wasn't just about your job performance, it was also like, where do you want to go in your career? And that's just so important. And another person I would think about would be a cheers to Martha. She is a super supportive peer who has been a great sounding board.
I love that. Such a good reminder of how we learn from each other. And great managers, by the way, totally agree. Having someone who not only wants to give you feedback on your performance on the here and now, but wants to help guide you and help you get to where you want to go and what you want to be doing. It's really special to have a leader like that. Okay, so my last question for you, I promise this is the last one. Where else can we access your expertise? Is it best to just find you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. Find me on LinkedIn. And then, if you are in transition, looking to upskill, or just need someone to chat with, I offer career coaching to support that next step. And you can book a session with me at topmate.io/yourcareerwings. I think we all need someone in our corner. And if you are listening to the podcast, there might be a special discount for you as a first-time client.
What? Amazing. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Sharon. I will absolutely be adding that special discount code to the show notes. So if anyone is interested, please check that out. I have had various mentors and coaches over my life, and I cannot say enough how much it has changed my life, my career for the better. So highly recommend it. Again, thank you so much, Sharon. This has been lovely. And thank you, PMM listeners, for coming on this adventure with us today. I hope this episode leaves you with inspiration to take the next step in your own journey.